Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the CCCB, I would like to welcome you to this gathering, which inaugurates a week of conversations and seminars within the framework of the Global Dialogues promoted by Georgetown University in the US. This is an initiative by Tom Banchov, Vice President of Global Engagement of the university, and Pankaj Mishra, writer and well known here for his books published by Galaxia Gutenberg and for his ongoing relationship with the CCCB. To both of them, I would like to extend my sincere thanks for trusting the CCCB for this fascinating and necessary initiative and for the fruitful and stimulating dialogues that have brought us here. Like all the global dialogues, today's session seeks to open up horizons for the future in a world marked by hatred, war, and rearmament, and by the uncertainties arising from the climate emergency or the emergence of artificial intelligence in the current context dominated by resentment and the proud display of hate, speaking of solidarity, just like speaking of love, friendship, and empathy, might seem like a naive act while at the same time being a profoundly revolutionary one. And that is precisely what we're going to be doing these days, finding ways to try and resist the prevailing sense of impotence and resignation and the uncritical acceptance of the crisis of democracy and the supposed end of the world in order to imagine new ways of living together and building shared possible futures. We'll do so with writers from different parts of the world and particularly with voices from countries of the so-called Global South, whose perspective enrich and broaden our public debate with other viewpoints, geographies, and traditions. Europe's crisis is also a crisis of imagination, a lack of political ideas to sustain a world that is no longer the one that emerged from the ashes of the Second World War. This is why we find it essential to open and foster dialogue with creators and intellectuals from other geographies and other histories, often linked to ours through the cruel experience of colonialism. In an interdependent world like ours, this broadened perspective also allows us to recognize our shared humanity with those who may at first seem different from us. But the Global South is not a distant or faraway geography, it is also a reality within our home. 30% of Barcelona's residents were born abroad, and in the Raval neighborhood where we sit today, more than 70% of residents come directly or indirectly from other geographies and cultures. The largest communities in this district come from Pakistan, the Philippines, Bangladesh, or Morocco, and these are only some of the many cultures that today enrich our cities. Getting to know the literatures and homelands of our fellow citizens and building bridges between cultures is part of our ethical and political commitment as a public institution, and we will continue doing so even if it means going against the current. For all these reasons, we will continue to defend and build international alliances today more necessary than ever, aware of the world's interdependence and our shared destiny, and will do so, as always, from our own context, incorporating our own challenges into the global debate and including the voice of local thinkers, writers, and academics to nurture this space amongst different cultures, languages, and traditions with the confidence that it will generate a fertile and ongoing dialogue. We will speak about the future and will do so by including the voices of young people and students. I would like to thank Ono Ciro, Director of the International Relations degree at the Blanquerna Ramollo University, for his involvement in designing a student dialogue in collaboration with Georgetown. And I would like to thank the schools in Barcelona and around that have wanted to participate in our critical thinking program with adolescents, one of the CCCB's most stimulating and hopeful initiatives. To all of them, as well as to the fellows and participants in the program, and especially to the teams from Georgetown and the CCCB, thank you very much. In today's anti-intellectual climate, with the proliferation of lies and the systemic rejection of complexity and empathy, the CCCB will continue to place its trust in education, in public discourse, in rigorous, reasoned, and plural debate, and in the power of literature to invent and imagine other possible futures. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Judith, for your kind words of welcome and for the generous partnership of your entire team. It's really, really exciting to bring the Georgetown Global Dialogues here to Barcelona and to this beautiful space here at CCCB. I bring you greetings from our entire Georgetown University community and from our campus in Washington, D.C. At a tumultuous time in the United States and Europe and around the world, it's really exciting, really a source of joy to have this opportunity to reflect together over the course of several days on our themes of human frailty and global solidarity. Together with Pankaj Mishra, my co-convener of the dialogues, which we call GGD for short, I want to welcome our GGD fellows, a group of 7 leading writers and thinkers from around the world, as well as the Georgetown University faculty who are here, and many other prominent speakers, writers, and critics from Spain and from right here in Barcelona. We also have, over here to my left, a contingent of some 16 university students, 8 from Georgetown, 4 from Washington, D.C., and 4 from our campus in Doha, Qatar, and 8 from the Blanquerna School of Communication and International Relations, our academic partner here in Barcelona. They'll be participating in the dialogues this week as well. And of course, I extend a warm welcome to all of you who joined us for the dialogues this evening here in Barcelona, and all of those joining us online around the world. Pankaj and I began working on GGD 2.5 years ago with the encouragement and support of Georgetown's president, John J. DeGioia. Our goal was to generate, or to help to generate, a more inclusive global conversation about ways forward in a divided world, to draw not on the usual established policy experts, but to bring together a wide range of critics, writers, scholars, and activists, mainly from the Global South, to engage in dialogue with one another, with our faculty, with students, and with the wider public. Not a one-off, but to do so over several years, a sustained dialogue designed to generate new ideas, but also to cultivate friendships and to build community. So we're in the middle of this multi-year conversation right now. We launched GGD in Washington back in April 2024. The focus there was a critical look at the role of the United States in a changing world. We convened again in Rome this past June, where the focus was on Pope Francis and his legacy and his vision of human fraternity. And from Barcelona, where our theme this week is human frailty and global solidarity, we'll be moving to Georgetown's campus in Qatar next March, and from there in October to Indonesia, where Georgetown has a new academic location. So at a time of pessimism and even despair about the state of the world, we aspire collectively to look forward with hope through gatherings like this, through GGD webinars and online forums, and through a media partnership with the New York Review of Books, to encourage broad and inclusive exchanges that address the depth of our current challenges, from war and social inequality to AI, climate crisis, and indeed the crisis of democracy. The promotion of dialogue is central to Georgetown's mission and identity as a Catholic and Jesuit university committed to intercultural and interreligious dialogue for the common good. Yes, we are based in Washington, D.C. We are a very American institution. At the same time, though, we're part of an international network of almost 200 Jesuit universities. We have a global horizon. 5 years ago, Pope Francis, himself a Jesuit, wrote an encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, Brothers and Sisters All, encouraging us to build what he called a culture of encounter, to get to know and understand one another, to acknowledge our differences, but also to pursue common projects together, no matter how divided or how troubled the world should get. To build a culture of encounter requires that we acknowledge our own weaknesses, our own frailty, as well as the frailty of those with whom we disagree, and that we creatively draw on all of our resources, cultural, philosophical, and spiritual, in the face of our common challenges. Maybe you agree. I think there's no better place than Barcelona to foster a culture of encounter. Barcelona, your vibrant and beautiful world city. And no better partner with whom to cooperate than the CCCB, a global leader in convening conversations that bring together the local, the national, and the international in dynamic ways. Tonight's opening session on building solidarity in a fragmented culture is a fitting introduction to some of our core themes this week. Tomorrow evening, we'll be exploring the pervasiveness of cruelty in our culture and politics and how to address it. And in further sessions on Wednesday and Thursday, we'll address topics including the turn to the global south and Europe after America. There's a question mark there. Europe after America? And of course, we'll feature our students. We have a conversation in particular with students for the wider public on the challenges of intergenerational solidarity. So thanks again for joining us for GGD Barcelona. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. And as we get started, please join me in welcoming Pankaj, Eche, Marina, and Hisham. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I would actually very quickly like to add my own personal expression of gratitude to Judith, the CCB, an amazing team. Increasingly, Barcelona seems like a refuge, a home in this time of global moral and political emergency. And I personally feel very attached to this city and to the CCB, having known this place for nearly 25 years now. I feel like different components of my life this evening coming together. I started writing for the New York Review of Books, a media partner for GGD, nearly 3 decades ago, and editor Emily Greenhouse is here. And it's really, in many ways, a moment pregnant with many, many different meanings for me. So really, I'm extraordinarily grateful to be here and to have this opportunity, to have this wonderful audience with which to discuss some of these very pressing issues that we'll be discussing over the next few days and certainly this evening. And I think, also, I suppose, trying to look beyond the tsunami of bad news, of events that are too shocking, too catastrophic and devastating in their sheer scale. The constant sort of feeling of outrage that we all feel living day to day, consuming the news, or being forced to consume the news. And so we conceived of these dialogues really as a way to certainly temporarily escape this sort of state of unproductive engagement with the news, but also to think of a world beyond this one that we are living in, this world that we are currently inhabiting. And certainly, perhaps very few ways of conceiving of that another world, the possibility of another world, than to think of solidarity as an ideal that is mostly embodied these days, mostly successfully, by plutocrats. If you look at what's happening in New York City right now with the election tomorrow, there's no better evidence of plutocratic solidarity than the number of people who've come together to try and defeat Zoran Mamdani. Other examples, of course, the solidarity of the tech bros. So it's worth asking the question before I turn to Eche for her reflections on this. How come this sort of ideal, one of the 3 most important ideals and principles of the modern world, in addition to liberty and equality, how did this ideal suddenly become unavailable to so many of us? How is it that it's only the super rich who manifest solidarity in its most effective forms today, ganging up together, standing against social justice, preventing various forms of social welfare schemes. And I think perhaps because solidarity, the pursuit of solidarity, is a much more complicated pursuit than the pursuit of liberty and equality. And certainly, perhaps for that reason, it is less talked about, is less theorized than the ideals of liberty and equality. But anyway, I should not hog the mic too much here. I'm going to turn to H.A. for her reflections on this principle.
Thank you, Pankaj. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Judith. Thank you, CCCB. It is, am I too loud? It's a bit too. It is amazing to be here. And as Pankaj said, it feels like home when everything else in the Western Europe and in the United States seems so disastrous. Spain, and particularly Barcelona, feels like a refuge. And I have many friends who are planning to exile themselves to Barcelona. I hope you're ready to accommodate some absolutely controversial thinkers, artists, and writers. Those who have money, they choose Barcelona. Those who do not have money, they go to Greece. So these two cities, I think, will be very, very interesting. We're looking for refuge. Many of us who are living in London, in Washington, in Turkey, like me, now I'm not living there anymore, but so many countries, so many cities are now full of people trying to find a safer place for a little bit longer. We all know that what's happening in the world, both politically and environmentally, will hit everywhere in the end. But we're looking for that last few years that we can spend in a safe space. We entered the stage of survival. In intellectual world or academic world, Marina would know better, for the last 10 years, survival, for 7 years, 8 years, survival has become a very, very hot topic. Not only against environmental crisis, but also against the political crisis. How are we going to survive? However, I think this urgency, the urgency of survival, the need to survival, is not very widespread. That sense of we will have to survive very soon is not widespread enough. Otherwise, I cannot see a reason, an obstacle to solidarity. Because we are in a time and in a space where, in order to survive, it is obvious that we have to be in solidarity against the political crisis, against the environmental crisis. So why is not happening? Since few years, I've been thinking about this obstacle. What is that obstacle? What stops us from being in solidarity, being in full solidarity? Imagine an alien who is a little bit wiser than us, or who is wiser, as wise as we are in this room, coming to a world, seeing what's happening, and the first thing he or she would say would be, so you have to do something together. So why aren't we doing that? What is the moral, political obstacle before this? I think it is the assessment of reality. We do not assess the reality in the same way. This is one reason. But the second reason, and more obscure reason, is that we still think that we can survive on our own. Even those of us who speak about solidarity, we are looking for cities to spend the last few good years on Earth. So this sense of we can survive, we can get away with it, we can survive on our own, is, I think, far more deeply buried in us than we'd like to imagine. I have many friends who are really trying to find a refuge on Earth right now, in Europe, around Europe, and all of them are talking about solidarity, including me. So I don't know if we have the pure integrity about this. This is one point I want to make. And the other point about solidarity is, we talk about solidarity so much because of Gaza in the last 2 years. But what kind of solidarity we talked about was quite vague, I think, in solidarity with Palestine, in solidarity with Gaza. What does that mean, really? Ironically enough, 1 week ago, I was in Poland, and I thought about this in Poland. In Poland, as opposed to Barcelona or Spain, or in Germany, where I live, the danger of war, or Putin's invasion, to be more precise, is very imminent. They are organizing meetings like we do right now, and then people in the coffee break are talking about crowdsourcing drones, crowdsourcing tanks. People like intellectuals, writers, publishers, they are talking about buying weapons. And they told me, after a while, I told them, but then this is so bizarre. How do you buy a tank anyway? What do you do with a tank when you buy it, and so on? So when I told them about this, and I told them that I was, taken aback with this whole conversation about weapons, they told me this is how you should be in solidarity with us. So I thought about Gaza. What did we do in Gaza, and what could we do for, Poland or for the coming war? So these are my very scattered thoughts about solidarity, and I'm seeing the time, so I'm passing the word to you.
That's a very interesting point, Eche, you make about survivalism. Perhaps another way of defining it would be to talk about a kind of hyper-individualism, where you have broken free of all notions of collective welfare or broad uplift or general uplifts, and you think the world is in such a bad way that there can be no conversation anymore about the social contract, and that all we should be looking to do is to ensure that we ourselves as individuals survive. And you certainly see that mentality within the super rich, this whole idea of buying land in New Zealand, for instance, and prepare for the end of the world or go to some other planet and colonize it and be there. So survivalism is definitely an underexplored ideology, but an incredibly influential one right now, which is definitely, in a way, poses this obstacle that you're speaking of. But I also want to pick up, and maybe Marina would have something to say about this, the sort of more facile notions of solidarity that we invoke rhetorically when we speak about solidarity with Gaza, or solidarity with Palestine, or solidarity with Poland. What is it that we actually mean? Are there ways in which this solidarity are there ways in which this idea of solidarity can be filled with positive content instead of just remaining a rhetorical maneuver that can be ideologically abused? Marina?
Thank you, Pankaj. Moltes gràcies.
Thank you very much. I'll give a few seconds to my colleagues so that they can get equipped with a translation device. Thank you very much, CCCV. Thank you very much for hosting this gathering. Thank you very much for being a refuge and a place of encounter. Thank you very much for this way of doing, for allowing debate and knowledge and exchange to happen. So I totally celebrate being part of this gathering tonight. I would like to start my remarks by somehow landing into a very specific context at a very specific moment in time. I'm not sure Spain is such a safe place, because a year ago, literally 229 people died out of a flood in Valencia. So it's not a matter of, it was not a divine punishment. It is a way of building. It is a way of dealing with a landscape. It is a way of doing politics. It is a way of being apolitical. It was a result of undermining citizens, depicting citizens, and even relativizing the right to life, the right to social relationships, and the political right to existence, right? So having said that, a year ago, this terrible flood ravaged Valencia, and today, this morning, I guess many of you here in the room are amongst those who've been affected by the magnitude of the scandal of what happened after the terrible floods in Valencia. So this morning, Carlos Mazón, the president of the Valencia government, said in his speech, in his public speech, to announce between brackets his strange demission, said, and I'm going to quote him literally, he said, the images of solidarity are the warmest light of hope of these days. Literally, this is what he said. The images of solidarity are a ray of hope from the days of the flood, the days when water and flood took the lives of many with them, right? So the solidarity of the people, right? Because he's invoking the people who becomes a community as a result of, being subject to a natural disaster. And for him, and of course, it's not the people who has demonstrated against him every month until they managed to kick out President Mazón. So there is a clear split. There is a clear political split between the ray of hope, the ray of light. Oh my gosh, I was expecting like an epiphanic discourse, and the people, on the other hand, organized antagonistically in a defense of the victims, and the very same fact of what being citizens mean, being people in that specific place named Valencia. So I ask myself, what is this depoliticized and depoliticizing solidarity? To what extent this ray of hope that President Mazón talks about somehow fills the gap of a policy which has not only left a vacuum because it's been inefficient, but also because it has emptied all political content, and it leaves room to this sort of epiphany, the epiphany of a people. Oh, by the way, knowing that, especially for those coming from abroad, maybe you didn't know. So again, Valencia has been demonstrating in the streets through a strange slogan, an ambivalent political slogan. The slogan is, only the people will save the people. This was the slogan used by many in the demonstrations in Valencia a year ago. People from the far extreme right to self-organized left-wing groups, and many people who would not feel identified with any ideology or political organization. So again, this slogan, only the people will save the people, was the slogan of this ambivalent solidarity, which today is also being used by extreme or far-right political organizations, including Vox, whom it seems will be the principal or the main political beneficiary of the situation in Valencia. So, after this introduction, I would like to lay on the table the topic of ambivalence. Why us, right? The people can also become a mass force, not only in the good sense of the word, but also in politicization and towards the right. And I was wondering that precisely because if there's something behind this proposal, right, you put on the table about solidarity in a fragmented world, I think it is interesting to think, why us? What us? What us have been, let's say, depicted in the last few years in the 21st century, which somehow started with a very strong 9/11, which opened a new definition of collectivities all around the world, positive and negative ones, especially in the Mediterranean, because here we are represented 3 Mediterraneans from different sides of the country of the Mediterranean Sea, right? But 9/11, or rather 2011, marked or invoked a different way of talking about us in an open way from a political friendship perspective with other peoples and with other territories. And in a decade, in a short decade, the us of the society of enemies, quoting Shimemle, have little by little colonized the space, right, beyond individualism. So again, around individualism, new ways of saying us have, I don't know if it's an individualistic way, but it's at least a privatized way, this struggle for identities, for survival, and again, this exercise of the right not to be somehow killed. And I would like to leave it here, and I'm sure we'll go back to the topic later.
Thank you, Marina. Incredibly stimulating ideas. Of course, I think 9/11 is that moment where you have a new kind of configuration of what us means and what them means. And I'm sure Hisham would speak eloquently about that reconceptualization, because I think many of us felt that very directly, continue to feel that in the way suddenly a whole system of exclusions and hierarchies was in place. And I think the idea before 9/11 of a sort of globalized world in which we're all jointly embarked upon the pursuit of liberty and happiness through global capitalism, that narrative was disrupted on that day, and sort of new collectivities or imagined collectivities started to emerge, and perhaps it's what we are seeing today in 2025 is the most extreme form of those imagined collectivities. So thank you, Marina, for historicizing this so elegantly. Hisham?
Hello, good evening, and thank you so much. Thanks to everybody who is involved in this. So many people from Georgetown, from CCB, and to the translators. Thank you to the people who put the chairs out. And thank you all for coming. And it's your presence is felt. I'm always fascinated by this moment because, in a sense, what we end up saying, each one of us has prepared some ideas, but I think what we end up saying is slightly different from what we have prepared, and I think you determine that. The quality of your presence determines that. The only complaint I have is I find this very funny. It's almost like a full sentence. No, Hisham matar eche. It's a dangerous beginning. The people are very polite about my name in Spain. Nobody says anything. People are much more direct in Latin America, I discover. They enjoy, I remember this, in Colombia, whenever I would say my name, people say, Señor Matar. You know? So, but just to be clear, Señor Matar has come to murder no one today. So, I'm just thinking perhaps to just posit, I know the definition, solidarity is such a, it's such a big idea open to interpretation, of course, and it's one of the things we're doing tonight already is opening it up to interpretation. But perhaps just as a kind of imperfect definition might be to be moved to action for the benefit of the common good. And thinking about it in this way, I thought of another Arab who has a very strong connection to your country. I have to admit, my connections to Barcelona, my love and passion for Barcelona is not intellectual. It's not even political or moral, actually. It's only because your city really reminds me of the city of my childhood, of Tripoli. The first time I came to Barcelona, I took a train from Paris to Barcelona, and it was one of those modern trains, you know, where the air is circulating around all the time. And the moment we arrived here, 8 o'clock in the morning, the train doors opened, and my eyes were stung with tears because I smelled, there's a particular smell to a city by the Mediterranean. Only Mediterraneans know it. It's a very particular kind of smell. So I've always returned here, and I've formed many wonderful friendships. The other Arab that I mentioned is Ibn Rushd. And Ibn Rushd, of course, you would know him as Averroes. Ibn Rushd was born in 1126 in Qurtuba. You would excuse me for pronouncing it in the Arabic fashion. And he died in 1198. He died in Marrakesh, but in his will he left a very passionate instruction to be returned and buried in Qurtuba, where he is buried still. Ibn Rushd produced many important works of philosophy, philosophy of medicine. In fact, just philosophy of medicine, over 18 volumes survive. He wrote more than that. And he wrote also on law. He was a jurist in Qurtuba. But he was fascinated by rhetorics. And of course, we would know him much more by his commentary on Aristotle. In fact, the way we understand Aristotle today is heavily filtered through Ibn Rushd, Averroes' thinking. But I've always found Ibn Rushd's enthusiasm for rhetorics really interesting, because in it he is seeking and at the same time troubled by the imperfections of knowing anything, of exchanging knowledge between people, and to what extent our ability to persuade is reliant on this imperfect medium of rhetorics. Persuasion, but also the question of belief. He was very interested in the susceptibility to believe something based on an argument or on words. And I remember the first time I read that, I thought, if I were to sit down and count all the things that I really know, I don't know because I read someone that I trusted, or because some other figure told me about it, but things that I really know myself, and they're very few. I could count them probably on my fingers. And this is something that was really uppermost for Ibn Rushd and caused him a kind of fascinating intellectual anxiety that one can follow in his work, right? And the reason for that is because a lot of his ideas relied on this notion of what he called unity of intellect, right? That to be a human being, we are all susceptible to the same factors. And therefore, whether we know it or not, we share a unity of intellect. And even the things that we don't know are incorporated in this unity of intellect, right? So, to put it very simply, the fact that when you were a child in Barcelona and I was a child in Tripoli and we both tasted a peach for the first time, we probably had analogous experiences, depending how passionate we are about peaches, right? And take from that to all the very profound experiences of love and joy and sorrow and death and birth. This sense of a unity of intellect made Ibn Rushd feel that, well, given that, it's actually quite an optimistic place from which to start. You know, in other words, solidarity as the normative state, right? When we don't express solidarity to one another, that's the abnormal state. That's when something has broken, right? And I feel right now, actually, maybe I catch myself being, this is why I love these guys, because you always inspire in me a sense of optimism that is otherwise lacking in my quiet hours. But I catch myself feeling a sense of, I think, grounded optimism in the depth and currency of the sort of solidarities that we are experiencing right now. They are broken, imperfect. They haven't found full expression, absolutely. All of these problems exist. But I think they do indicate to the power of this idea of the unity of intellect. Even, I would say, this is how optimistic now you catch me, even, I would say, virtue signaling, right? Even, in other words, these kind of really terrible expressions of solidarity, the sort of insincere expressions of solidarity, are also, I think, conscious, subconsciously conscious of a crisis with unity of intellect or the need for it. I'll stop here.
I was thinking about this normal state, abnormal state thing, which actually, where my thinking comes from. The world in general, especially after Second World War, but more so after the 1980s, have been through a moral disaster, so to speak. It was imposed on us that the normal state or the natural state of humankind is to survive on their own. This was neoliberal morals or lack of it. So it was, this idea is now so widespread that survival can only be possible by, on your own, and if you want to survive, you have to sell out the others. This idea has been there for such a long time, it has been propagated for such a long time, that we actually forgot that the natural state of humans is to be in solidarity, actually. But my question in general nowadays today is like, what are we ready to do? What are we prepared to do? That's why I mentioned Poland and Gaza together. Some people, and this country was the one who supported those people strongly, some people got on a flotilla and they went to Gaza. They put their life in line for Gaza. And some people are now buying weapons for the coming, disaster, war, and so on. I am not sure that we all understand, it has come to that, that we are going to be, we have to remember that our natural state is solidarity. Not only that, but also solidarity up to a level of sacrifice, self-sacrifice. And I was thinking about what is the difference between solidarity, because you said plutocrats are in solidarity. I think they're not in solidarity, they are collaborating. They're cooperating, perhaps. And I was thinking, what is the difference between collaboration in that level and what is the solidarity when we talk for us? I think it is, as Hisham said, it's for common good, without thinking your interest, whereas collaboration, which plutocrats are doing in New York now, or in general in Washington, Silicon Valley, or all the techno-lords, overlords of the world with politicians like Trump, what they're doing is collaborating for their shared interest, whereas in solidarity, there is no interest. There might be even the chance of self-sacrifice, possibility, probability of self-sacrifice. I am not sure we are morally ready to accept the fact that we might be very close to that point where our sacrifice is needed. That's why I mentioned people are still looking for refuge cities. No, there won't be any refuge, city to take refuge in. Thank you, Marina, for destroying the idea of Barcelona as a refuge city. So there won't be any place like that. So what happened in the world lately is something that we don't want to articulate, probably, because it's so terrifying. What we have built after Second World War, all these institutions, that are, giving a little bit of social equality, giving a little bit of healthcare, a little bit of, social security. Those are, in very fast decay right now. So all those institutions we put there so that we don't have to think about solidarity. We institutionalize solidarity with those institutions. Those institutions are going away. They are dissipating. They are coming to pieces. So we will have to, as individuals or as groups, we will have to think about what solidarity means and what we are ready to do, because glows are off. All those things, rule of law, human rights, liberal democracy, that was the icing on the cake. It's gone now. So we have to be ready to replace, as individuals, those institutions that were put there. This was a gradual process. It didn't happen through a coup, military coup or anything. But at the end, we have been stolen our right to depend on institutions for solidarity. And those institutions were built exactly for that, so that individuals do not have to, wouldn't have to carry the burden of solidarity. But now we are in a different state where we will very seriously have to think about what are we ready to do to be in solidarity, I think.
Thank you, Ece, for, again, posing the question very provocatively. I think, the idea of solidarity requiring sacrifice is a tremendously productive one. And I think, the distinction you make between plutocrats collaborating, by the way, I meant it ironically, of course, the plutocrat solidarity or plutocratic insurgency, as someone has called it. But yes, you're absolutely right. I think their solidarity or their collaboration is built upon the pursuit of very narrow interests, which are wealth and power for themselves, the expansion of the wealth and power they already possess, whereas the solidarity that's normative, as Hisham put it, is the recognition, instinctive recognition of mutual responsibilities and duties that we have, with other human beings with whom we share the planet. How to reinstitutionalize them, the question you're posing, when existing institutions that were meant to advance the common good are failing, disintegrating, or under tremendous attack from people who are opposed to them, the ultra-capitalists or hyper-capitalists who have never really had any kind of serious faith or commitment to ideas of the common good. Whether it's possible for individuals, helpless individuals, powerless individuals, individuals outside the political system to rebuild those institutions on the basis of solidarity. I mean, that's of course a big question, but I'd love to know what Marina thinks of this.
Sí, gracias.
Thank you very much. You kept me thinking about this call or this invocation of Berroy's here amongst us, right, in this unity of conscience. And it was also unity of imagination. Berroy's philosophy has a very deep component around imagination. He says that imagination is not an individual skill. Through Romanticism and through contemporary individualism, we've thought that the more imaginative we are about how to survive, we'll have a better life. Imagination aimed at finding solutions, an individualistic solution, whereas the imagination about, listen, how can we imagine living with each other? I believe this is the relevant question, the question that allows us to see what configurations of the world, and the world is far beyond our own lives and our own borders, right? So how do we imagine things going on beyond us? And if something has happened in the last few years, in this last few decades, is that some part of the imagination is broken. Something is what was unimaginable is now taking place. We are all pointing at this in different ways. It was unimaginable for fascism to go back, to put it in a simple way, right? It was not imaginable that we would have to fight for survival, or thinking that sacrifice was necessary again in order to find for struggle for certain values. It was not imaginable to be flooded in Valencia a few years ago. So what has happened? What has happened with this, let's say, dilution of the borders of what's imaginable and not imaginable, beyond the concept of normality, which doesn't really help us, I believe. I was telling my colleagues before that many years ago I did a presentation, my first presentation, before a large audience in this very same podium, and the conference was on commitment. And the initial question is, what makes us commit with others? Because, commitment is not abstract. It has limits, it has borders and fringes, and depending on how we interpret the world will define our commitment one way or another. So my initial or provocative question for that conference was, to what extent are we committed, right? To what extent are we also willing to receive others' commitment? So again, we are engaged with others because we shared a common planet. Like it or not, this is not an option, and commitment, it is not a sovereign act of your own willingness, which is a dilution of the modern being who decides to commit or not commit with the world depending on his or her capacity to feel safe, to feel isolated, or not concerned by tsunamis and wars and all the pests of the world. So how to relearn this bond? And I used a quote, which I keep thinking about, by Merleau-Ponty, a quote by Merleau-Ponty, whom during the 40s, after the Second World War, he wrote, between many other interesting things, he wrote the unjustifiable certainty, the certainty that needs no justification in a shared world is for us the basis of truth. It is a quite dense sentence. We could spend an hour and a half trying to analyze it. So the unjustifiable certainty for us is the basis of the truth. It has a lot to do with what you were talking about, Hisham, precisely, right? For me, it means a lot. I had just published a book entitled A Common World back then, and not far ago, in a debate, someone asked me, are we not precisely at the moment when it's about time to justify certainty or truth? Are we not at the times when what is not required of a justification, we ask to justify it once and again? Solidarity. Do we really need to argue in favor of solidarity? Do we really need to argue in favor of friendship, love, social fairness? Do we really need to justify ourselves for believing in freedom, in equality? To what extent? So this is a question I have for you as well. I attempted to say that some things need no justification, but rather a commitment, a conviction, and some ideas of solidarity are not endlessly justifiable, but rather are the grounds on which we can start justifying or arguing in favor of our positions, our moral position. But nonetheless, the question made me shake a little bit. So this is why I wanted to somehow forward it at you. And I would like to, know to what extent, right? Or is there anything which was unimaginable that has somehow found its way into us, and there is a massive gap, and now we need to justify things in an endless way? I know the question has no answer, and I know you're not going to be able to answer it right away, of course.
It's such an interesting question. It makes me think that perhaps one of the things that we should do is differentiate between the practice of solidarity and the material outcomes, right? Because I think when the material outcomes are not to our satisfaction, we could be in danger of underestimating the power of the practice of solidarity, right? So I speak personally, immensely moved and surprised, I have to say, because I have lived in Britain since I was 15. I cannot tell you, if I were to bottle for you the conversations that were had or not had about Palestine in my life in Britain, it would be a very, very sour drink, right? It's just so complicated, the silences around it. Every time you have to start way from the bottom. You have to start all the history. It seems to be possible to continue to be an intelligent, otherwise discerning human being in Britain while being able to exhibit complete stupidity, I don't know what other word to put it, when it comes to this issue of Palestine and Israel. Like, it's fine not to know the history, it's fine to not apply rigorous thinking, all of these things fall out of place. And what it does over time is that it sort of wraps you up into a sort of veil of silence, right? So for me, it was very powerful over these last 2 years to see this veil of silence break. And of course, it broke against the most horrific genocide. But to see people move, learn, go to the library, think, and become actually willing to risk their personal safety, their money, their freedom, it's very powerful. And I think it's not something to underestimate. Similarly, I can't tell you the amount of times my mother would call me up from Cairo, where she lives, and says, "Have you seen what's happening in Spain?" Right? People are amazed, friends and family members and the press also, you read it in the Arab world. People are genuinely moved by the outrage and the solidarity that is felt in Spain, in Ireland, in Norway. These are seismic events. They are not things that should be underestimated. I think we underestimate them at our peril. The question is, what can become of them? I think this is the link that we are struggling with, is how do you funnel this energy, this genuine, humane solidarity into something beyond just an expression of discontent? This is, I think, the issue. Lots of people are doing good work, organizing and campaigning and raising money and putting pressure on their governments. All of that, again, is not to be discredited or said it's not enough. No, that's fantastic. But I feel that we stand the risk a bit of underestimating this event and what we can do with it.
I think in many ways, even phrasing the question as clearly as you and Marina and H.A. have just is hugely important. We were not having these conversations a few months ago or a couple of years ago. The fact that we are actually now sitting here thinking about our dysfunctional institutions, which are not responding intellectually, morally, politically to these emergencies we are living with today, and thinking what can we do to make this solidarity more politically effective, have a bigger meaning than just demonstrations or protests. How do we build enduring institutions that incarnate that spirit of solidarity, those unjustifiable certainties that you speak of, Marina? So in that sense, I think it's, for us, it's important to keep asking that question and keep refining that question. And just in the last few minutes, I think thinking about solidarity in question with sacrifice, and people who are going out in the streets demonstrating about an event that is happening thousands of miles away, whether in Spain or in Italy, there is an element of sacrifice there. It's not the kind of sacrifice that I suppose Gandhi was making in India during those decades and decades. He spent fighting for India's independence, but nevertheless, these are huge commitments. And they demonstrate that the individual conscience, that unjustifiable certainty, is alive. And we need institutions to harness that impulse, and to sometimes speak a simple language. I think for us as writers and intellectuals, there's a danger, it's always present, of retreating into an abstract language, a language that borrows a great deal from academic disciplines, and sometimes actually losing sight of some very, very clear, undeniable things of the kind Ibn Rushd could see in the 12th century, and people before him, obviously, and to keep kind of insisting on those basic principles. But anyway, Eche, I think you want to say something.
No, actually, I thought we were going to do the, yeah.
I'm being told that it's time to transition to questions and to surrender my mic. So,
I was being responsible.
I can't see very clearly, but perhaps.
There's a hand back there.
Oh, there, yes.
Si no, potser si tinguéssim una mica més de llum, perquè no els veiem.
Yeah.
Perfecte.
There's been a lot of talk about solidarity, and the lack of solidarity. And I see around me in this world tons of solidarity, but they are concentrated in nationalism and in fanatic expressions of religious expressions of fanatism, dogmatism, etc., whereas the lack of solidarity is more apparent on the left. Now, what has been the main antidote to nationalism, to xenophobia, to fundamentalist religions was, on the left, was socialism or social democracy. And none of you have mentioned this, and I really wonder how come that this is not mentioned. I mean, because we are here in Barcelona, in this opulent city. Most of the world's population live in extreme poverty. Some of you come from Turkey, from India. I mean, this issue of, the damage of capitalism, late capitalism, where is that? Where is socioeconomy? Where is class? I mean, I'm quite surprised by, not mentioning this. I mean, we are in Barcelona. This city has a long tradition of conflict between left and right. Who opposed Franco? The anarchists, the anarcho-syndicalists, the socialists. So this is basically my question. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, that is a of course, very important corrective. I think socialism did, in a way, take over from Christianity, the idea of fraternity and solidarity, and against, became a very strong moral critique of capitalism, and has, in a way, perhaps embodied the spirit of solidarity more than any other ism. And of course, you're right in saying it's a corrective against nationalism, against the excesses of nationalism and capitalism. I would ask Marina or Eche or Hisham to answer this, but my feeling is that I think solidarity around the idea of class has become a lot more complicated, because class itself is not as clearly defined as it originally was when socialism emerged. I mean, today we are living in much more complicated global capitalist economies where class as a basis for solidarity is not that easily available. But perhaps you'll have
Sí, no, gràcies per la...
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question, and there is no doubt that maybe we didn't mention it, but we were speaking, understanding that, I mean, for us, historically, and anarchism, socialism, communism have responded to the question of what about solidarity? And one of the elements that need to be factored in the 21st century, because they are under, or being questioned. The thing is, what is the intersection between gender, class, colonialism, neocolonialism? What is this crossroad that finds or somehow combines all these struggles, and how is it possible that not all these struggles are perceived as common? Now, the class debate today, this is one of the key question marks, and it's not a rhetorical one, it's a very practical question. But how can we discuss about class in such a way that not only we tend to reactivate historical imaginaries, but also we do it in the current conditions of the contemporary world. Nonetheless, the concept of class has always been tricky. Be careful, there's no easy answer or univoc or self-evident answer to the question or to the debate about class, or to those who are called, I include myself, in this struggle for equality. The class is not a fake, but an invention. It's an exercise of political imagination. And again, today, this is one of the turning points in the present and many of the struggles that different solidarity practices around the world are also raising and that are crossed by class.
I was, you started your question by saying, so why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And I was actually, you started by saying that lack of solidarity in the left. And I was preparing to mention this, this culture of behavior in the left, among the leftists, that has been there for quite a long time, and I think it is ruining the left in general, which is lack of compassion and lack of love. When I say this, it sounds very hippie, but what I mean is, first of all, I'm a leftist, obviously, and for my defense, I mentioned capitalism. We don't treat each other properly. And we always, a little bit, we have this, we're coming from this culture of, why don't we talk about class? Why don't we say this? And why I understand, and I don't get very intimidated by it at all, not at all. But young people, when they see leftists talking like this, they're a little bit afraid, you see. They don't want to approach the leftist progressive communities because they are not really welcoming. I was in Vienna giving a speech, and I said that we have to be more compassionate, love is important, radical love is important, and among us, progressives, leftists, it is important. And I suddenly decided to perform like a priest. I went down the stage, and I said, how are you? And I, shook hands. And people started laughing, obviously, because it's a funny thing coming from a leftist. But then we, at this stage, since we are at the stage of survival, since we are absolutely defeated at this point, we might want to be more humble and more compassionate, and we might want to borrow that ordinary people attitude towards each other, which is like being simply more polite and more welcoming, more embracing. I think this is important, and this will save left in the world today, and also many more young people will feel more encouraged to be introduced to these ideas of socialism, anarchism, which obviously mentioned, solidarity was a central concept, but solidarity is far older concept than socialism or anarchism, as we all know. So yeah, this is what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Jim. Next question. Oh, Sergio.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much to all of you for being here and sharing your opinions. And my question is quite simple. Isn't solidarity a concept for the privileged? And how do we expect those who have to survive and fight on a daily basis, be compassionate and loving, and not prioritize anyone but themselves? Okay, thank you.
Sham, do you want to take this?
Maybe we understand the word differently, but in fact, I find solidarity much more abundant and easily expressed amongst the unprivileged. I have never experienced more generosity than from the poor. You know, I mean, and it's not something that is just me. It's happened to me. It's happened to so many people. But also, we'll go back to Gaza. Gaza is a very interesting one there. I mean, the amount of generosity that Palestinians in Gaza have negotiated amongst one another is remarkable. Is absolutely remarkable. People with one loaf of bread and haven't eaten for a long time, choosing to split it in half with a complete stranger, you know. So I don't know, actually. I don't want to. I'm also worried about sentimentalizing, you know, about saying that, well, you know, we can only be generous to one another if we experienced hardship. It's a very Abrahamic idea, no? But just anecdotally and looking around, seeing, I find that people who have really experienced hardship tend to be very generous. So that's my take on it.
Thank you. Hisham, I completely agree with you. I think there's an inversely relationship between socioeconomic status and solidarity. I completely agree with you. The richer and more wealthy and more powerful people are, the less open to helping the other people are. I completely agree with this in this sense. But I want to just make a point when you talked about solidarity and you talked about to be moved to action for the benefit of the common good. I love to emphasize the concept of action because you can be very empathetic and have a lot of feelings for what's going on around the world, but solidarity always implies to be devoted, to be willing to act, to do something for the common good. No? And in order to act, you need to have critical thinking. You need to have time available and critical thinking. And one of, for me, the main obstacle that we're facing nowadays is the huge influence of social media. I mean, all this predatory and techno-liberalism with the social media, which creates brain rot, neurological brain rot on one side. It really creates a very big bias of ideology. It affects a lot ideologically how people act, and then it completely kidnaps time availability. No? So, I mean, with this huge mega machine of social media completely kidnapping the minds of hundreds of millions of people, and considering that solidarity needs a lot of action to really make a point and transform society. I don't know how, I mean, I think that a big focus should be on how to try to fight against the amazing power and how social media colonizes people's time, availability, and their critical thinking capacity. You know?
I already spoke too much, but I'll just say this very quickly. I completely agree. But I also think there are lessons in the practice of it, you know? There's that, I mean, there's the fact that, I think it was Nasreen, our friend and colleague, the Nasreen Malik, you said in your essay, which is on the Georgetown Global Fellows website, that the fact, I'm paraphrasing, excuse me, Nasreen, but the fact that given all of this, that people are still able to express solidarity, to see the other person, to have compassion for the other person, is extraordinary, right? So you're absolutely right. It's a dismal situation, but I think perhaps part of the cure, part of the way forward, is to learn from, or to give energy and learn from all those people who are managing to do things still, to find that sense of coherence that you're talking about between outrage and action. But I'm with you. I'm very concerned by it.
Our young friend, not to be ageist, I think your question deserves a little bit more answer. Yeah, you. Yes, you know, I share the same observation. You know, the rich do not give observation, but we shouldn't stop at the observation. We should go deeper. Why solidarity? Why do you think solidarity is a privileged thing? Like only the privileged is entitled, or imagine the refugees. Not imagine, there are refugees, as we all know. People think that, you know, we must help refugees. We must be in solidarity with them, and so on. And there is always this, in the same way that you meant, this privilege, like, you know, we are above and we're giving the refugees something, and so on. I'm not a refugee. I'm sort of an exile, let's say. And I know personally that what keeps my dignity is giving, not taking. That is why poor gives, because dignity, they want their dignity. That's why they're in solidarity. That's why they're generous. That's why they're more compassionate, because this is the last thing they have, their dignity. So in order to protect it, they give. So when we're thinking solidarity, we should think about dignity rather than privilege as a concept. If you're in a poor situation, if you're poor, if you're underprivileged, there aren't many ways you can protect your dignity. You can only do it by helping the others. And if you are given that privilege as a refugee, as poor as the underprivileged, then you feel equal, even though materially you're not equal, but you feel human, I think. I think this is why solidarity is an important concept, especially for the underprivileged.
Can I say something? Un apunt, perquè penso que...
It's only, I mean, this wasn't the origin of the debate, and now we are diverting towards a definition of solidarity, which is perhaps the less interesting one, and the more instrumentalized one, which is the solidarity that unfortunately looks to charity, right? Solidarity is not, by definition, offering, giving. No. It's offering and giving in order to feel part of a same world, of the common problems. It doesn't mean we have the same problems, but they are common problems. And this is why I put the question, which us? Because if we go back home towards a charity-oriented definition of solidarity, a hierarchical approach regarding who can give, who can take, I believe we'll have lost track of the debate. And it is clear that there is a massive market of solidarity, a financial market, like there is a market of charity, charity and the market of the good conscience, right? But I don't think this is an interesting debate. I think solidarity is not necessarily material solidarity. On the contrary, and going back to anarchism, maybe solidarity is more about mutual support and not charity. But again, when I say mutual, and when I say the experience of reciprocity between peers and between people who are very different or who have different privileges. It doesn't mean that being unprivileged makes you, let's say, less prone to expressing your solidarity for other causes and for other people, because we are all called by common worlds. Let's get rid of this, market of solidarity and the Good Samaritan that wipes out the concept of solidarity towards a, let's say, area that makes it look totally uninteresting and apolitical and aethical, so to speak.
Thank you, Marina. I should also add that, events like these, public events like these, when we are temporarily free, at least, of the tyranny of the smartphone, it's a thing. Social media sort of offers an escape from isolation and loneliness. But as has been said a million times, social media reinforces that isolation in very insidious ways. And I think, today a simple act like coming together for a conversation like this. 2 nights ago, Nasreen, Hisham, and I were at an event in London where, again, one felt palpably a sense of not only community, but a sense of solidarity. And I felt like just coming together to discuss what binds us all together, what are we thinking together, those simple things that our ancestors have been doing for centuries and centuries, which, again, in our very busy, hyper-competitive, individualistic lives, we've kind of, gotten away from. And I'm extremely conscious about this because as a writer, I spend a lot of my time alone, reading, writing, thinking. And it's very rare, and this is becoming now more and more common for, me to be here with friends, colleagues in large communities like these and feel a shared sense of purpose, shared anxieties, shared concerns. And that in itself is, to answer Sergi's point, it's a form of action. It's a form of action that may not seem much, but that is already relieving at least some of the anxieties and fears that press down upon us all the time. But we've run out of time, so thank you so much for this amazingly stimulating discussion.